Hello, everybody, and hi, Les. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. A great sunny day here in this part of the world, and probably the UK as well. So yeah, doing good.
Warmest day tomorrow that we're going to have so far, so no complaints. I went to Speeting week, and I looked like I'd been dipped in chili, so I'm still a bit red, and I just caught it with them white rocks and sun bouncing off them. But yeah, it's great to be here. It's nice because we know we're close to weekend when we get to Thursday, aren't we? So truth proof always puts a smile on my face when we get to this time. You've been up to much?
Well, I'll just mention at the top of the show, thanks for alerting me to the spelling mistake in the last video we put out. So we are aware of that, and we'll probably do a reissue of that video as well at some point.
Yeah, no worries. I'm sure we can live with that, Les, but not to worry. So let's have a look. We've already got a few numbers building in chat. So good to see you, and thanks for the support, guys. So we've got Simon Riley, disabled Welshman stargazer, Bob Margaret Webster. Let's have a look. Olga, Martin Abbas, good to see you, Martin. Stephen Collin, Doc Sausage, Karen Beerman. Let's have a look. Matthew Cook, I think Linny will be in, and Mrs. Linny and Mia Girl. Pete will be watching. Good to see you, Pete. Alison's doing moderating. Thank you, Alison. And no link tonight. Lee's no signal.
And I see Tino's in, and I got to thank Tino for forwarding the suggestions for guests. Thank you, Tino.
Yeah, well, we've got Rob Blueshift, Tino, as you say, Jill Rue, Sober Carper, and let's have a look. I did see another one I'd not seen before, Kit 1.8T. Good to see you. And Dragonborn, I'm going to stop, as I say every week, Jojo, and let's bring on. Well, hold on a minute. Let's just have a little natter about Philip Mantle, because
just before you go, if you got any questions for Philip tonight and his new book, or for Paul for that matter, just put the questions in caps so I can easily identify him, and we'll read them out later on.
Well, he's done an absolutely incredible job. So, as people know tonight, we're talking with Philip Mantle, veteran researcher, author. Been in this game a long time. No doubt he'll tell us how many years. We're looking at over 40 years, I would think, with an avid interest, probably even going back further. So we're in for a treat tonight. Just when you think Pascagoula can't come up with anything else, he finds more information. I have a feeling this is going to run and run. It's turning into one of the greatest UFO cases in the world. And Philip, in my head, tongue-in-cheek here, guys, Philip can call himself Detective Philip Mantle, because he's done a proper investigative work on this case and really, really dug deep and got amazing information. So let's bring him on, shall we? Hello, Philip. Great to see you.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen. Nice to see you.
Absolutely. And you've been busy since we last. Well, you've not been very well. So first of all, good to see you back up and running. And you've been doing a lot of work, though, on the latest Pascagoula installment, should we say. And I want you're going to have to take us back to 1973 anyway, but hopefully you're going to fill us in on these updates as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, for those who are not aware of the case, it happened on October the 11th, 1973 on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. And the two main people involved at the time was Calvin Parker, who was 18, almost 19, and his friend Charles Hickson, who was 42. Calvin didn't live in Pascagoula. He lived in a place called Laurel, Mississippi, which was about 200 miles away. But both their families had grown up together. So, Calvin knew the family, and he got engaged. He was actually getting married the following month.
Right.
And he was working all the hours God sends. And his fiancée, Waynette, said, can't you just get us, a 9-to-5 job so I can see a bit more of you? And it was Calvin's father who said, why don't you ring Charlie Hickson up over Pascagoula way? He's a foreman in the shipyard. Might be able to get you a job. So we did. And Charlie says, yeah, we're setting on. So the plan was Calvin would go and live in Pascagoula with Charlie, bed and board, Monday to Friday, and go home on a weekend. And then if they liked it there, maybe they'd settle there themselves.
Yeah.
So Thursday, October the 11th, 1973, was Calvin's first day working in the shipyard as a welder. And they knocked off, about 4:30, 5 o'clock that night. Calvin's driving them home. He's got a brand new car, a Rambler Hornet, I believe it was called. Really? Never heard of it. Yeah, no. It was brand spanking new. And Charlie said, do you want to do some fishing tonight, son? They both love to fish.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah. So they had a bite to eat. They went and bought some bait. And Calvin didn't know this area at all. He didn't live there, but Charlie gave him directions. And so we're going to a place down by the river, and we can park the car, no problem. So he's giving him directions. And at one point, they passed a no entry sign, and Calvin commented on that. And Charlie said, I'll take no notice of it. You know, I've fished here many a time. They then passed a car that was parked up with a courting couple in it, as we might say. A bit old fashioned, but you know.
Yeah.
And they pulled up. They tried one spot on the river, and it was infested with flies. So they packed up and they moved to an old pier. There'd been a little shipyard that had closed. Right. And they sat on this old pier with a, you know, rod and line. I don't know what fishermen think about when they're fishing. I'm not a fisherman. But Calvin saw some blue lights come from behind, and they went out across the water. And he thought, oh no, it's the police. We're going to get the night in jail for trespassing. So they both turned round at about the same time. And of course, it wasn't the police. There was an oval shaped object descending. It had two lights at one end. It stopped about 18 inches above the ground. This opening appeared, and this intense blue light came out of this opening. Both guys had to shield their eyes. These three humanoid figures, and when I say floated, I mean floated. They didn't touch the ground, or again, about 18 inches, 2 feet off the ground. Calvin describes them as bulky looking creatures, head, no neck, long arms with pincers rather than fingers. The legs didn't move. The legs were stuck together. They had a greyish skin, and they had pointed protrusions out the side of the head and one out the front. Two got hold of Charlie, one got hold of Calvin. They took them to this thing. They went separate. That's it. They went separate as they got on board. Calvin said they laid me on this like a glass table at an angle, and this thing came out of the ceiling about the size of a deck of cards, pack of cards.
Right.
And it went around him making a clicking noise. It went back up. This creature had been stood in the corner. Calvin then heard this noise from behind, and a female appeared, looked almost human. The only real difference was that her fingers were longer and thinner.
Right.
And she put these fingers down his throat and up into his nasal cavity. He managed to get hold of her at one point, but, you know, it wasn't to be. And it was dumped back outside. Charlie said he was suspended. He didn't lie on any table. He was just suspended. And this thing came out of the wall in front of him. You see, it looked like a big eye. And that went around him twice, went back in, and then he was again deposited back whence he came. And he says Calvin was stood facing the river with his arms out like that.
But when he came to, and when he...
Yeah. So Charlie, you know, stumbled a bit and got hold of him and saying, "Are you all right, son? Are you all right, son?" And this thing went zip, and it was gone.
How much time? Sorry, Philip, I'm cutting through you. How much time have they lost? How much time did they suspect?
They don't know. I mean, it's one of the mysteries about it, because neither of them wore a watch. And even when I met Calvin many, many decades later, he still didn't wear a watch, you know. But they sat on this little pier for a while and terrified. I mean, they both were terrified. Charlie not as bad, because he'd fought in the army. He'd fought in the Korean War and had been in the thick of it at times.
Yeah.
And they decided they weren't going to tell anybody. You know, as daft as it seems, one of the things on Calvin's mind was, if my father-in-law to be finds out about this, remember he's getting married in November.
He's not going to think he's sane, is he?
He's going to say, we would laugh at that today, because our kids would just go and get married anyway. But it was different then, and a different country. So they decided not to say anything. So they walked back to the car. When they got to the car, remember this car's brand spanking new. The passenger side window was all smashed. When they opened the door, the glass just fell out of it. Calvin said to get it started, it took him about 20 times to get it going.
Right.
And he couldn't understand that because it's brand new.
Yeah.
So they set off to go home, and it was Charlie who had a change of heart. He says, we got to tell someone, son. What if these things come back and do this to somebody else? What if it's an invasion? He's thinking he's going back to his old military days.
Yeah.
So they pull in a little convenience store, and they use the payphone. And they first phoned Keesler Air Force Base, which is about 30 miles away. And they just said, we're not in the UFO business anymore. Phone your local, your local police. So they ring the police. And it's just how the Americans work. It was actually the area they were in was controlled by the sheriff's department. So they said, stay there, and we'll send a car to go and get you. So they did. They were escorted into town, into the sheriff's office. And it was Sheriff Fred Diamond and one of his deputies who interviewed them both separately. And then they put Charlie and Calvin in a room together and left them alone. Unbeknown to Charlie and Calvin, there was a tape recorder in the desk next to them. The idea was they say, we've got one over on the lawmen, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Laughing and joking. So the deputy came back, took the tape recorder out. They'd still no idea what was going on. And of course, when they played it back, they weren't laughing and joking. I mean, Calvin's praying. He's almost in tears, is the lad, So that changed the attitude of Fred Diamond and his deputy, Glenn Ryder, at the time. And they basically said,
they're telling the truth.
We think they're telling the truth, but there's nothing we can do, guys, go home. And they said, yeah, but don't tell anybody. So they said, no, we won't. So they go home. And as crazy it may seem to us now, the next day, they both got up to go to work. And when they got into the shipyard, they noticed there was a few extra vehicles around compared to a normal day. And then they hadn't been there long. They got a shout to go to the boss's office. And he said, you two, what the hell have you been doing? What do you mean? He said, we've had, journalists here and phone calls, that many phone calls, we can't get anything done. So they told their boss what had happened. And, the sheriff came again. And they actually blamed the sheriff for letting the story out. And the sheriff said, it wasn't me.
No.
Until his death, Calvin and Charlie never knew how the story got out. But it was out. They were then taken to the local hospital. They had a checkup there. And they were fine. And it was the sheriff, Fred Diamond, somebody's mentioned radiation. So Fred Diamond phoned Keesler Air Force Base. And they were taken to Keesler and checked over radiation, the same place they'd phoned the night before, who told them to get lost.
Yeah.
But they said, while you're here, guys, why don't you tell us what happened? And they went down into these offices and they told them everything. We actually have the transcript of that conversation. I was just
going to say, was that recorded? Or
it wasn't recorded. They had a stenographer.
Right.
So we have all the military people that were there. The police officers were there. The boss of the shipyard loaned Charlie and Calvin his attorney, a chap called Mike, I can't pronounce his name, Kolengo, I think it is. They didn't need an attorney, but he said he's there if you need it. He went along and, and that was it. The story was out.
Just a few things, Philip, and these are probably trivial, but did he ever come to a conclusion why car window were broke? I know we're talking about an alien abduction, but it was just the passenger side was facing them and this object. So, you think it's the effects of the object that's broke the window?
Could be.
Yeah.
It's an assumption. There's no evidence for that, but it was the passenger side window that was facing towards them, and it was shattered. And when they opened the door, it just fell out.
Okay. And so, what about physical marks on Calvin?
Well, Calvin said when he was on board this thing, one of the things this female did to him, and he took him a long time to tell me this, Paul, because to him it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
Calvin was brought up, and he was was a tough guy, even though he was young. And he told me, he said, if anybody picked on my brother in school, they had me to deal with. You know, it wasn't one for picking a fight, but I think he was one that would easily finish one, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's lying here helpless. And he said, they removed my lower clothing and my boots. And he said, they stuck something in my foot and it hurt. And both of them said that when these creatures grabbed hold of them, they were absolutely terrified. They felt some kind of injection in their arm. So back to coming forward in time now, in 2018, I'm starting to investigate this case. And I put out a blanket request to everybody who I could, Paul. I mean, politely pestered the living daylights out of people.
Yeah.
Now, Hynek was on site within 72 hours.
Yeah.
You know, so the obvious place to go was the Centre for UFO Studies. It's still there.
That also tells you, I know you're going with this, I don't want to break your train of thought here, but that also tells you the gravity of this case.
Well, I'll explain to you how Hynek got there. So
can you explain who Hynek is for anybody in our audience that doesn't know before you get to that?
If anybody who doesn't know who Hynek is, he's the man who invented the phrase close encounters, appeared and worked on the movie with Steven Spielberg. He was the Project Blue Book, United States Air Force's scientific advisor for 20 years or more. He was initially very skeptical, but when he finished with Blue Book, he'd gone the other way, and he set up the Centre for UFO Studies, which just happened to open that year, 1973.
Yeah.
So Hynek died in the 80s, but the centre's still going in name, and they have all the records. So I asked them if they had anything. And they sent me a file on PDF, mostly newspaper cuttings. But right in the middle of this file, Paul, is a one-page typed letter, typed piece of paper. And when I say typed, I know it's typed because I used to use a typewriter when I first started, and the date has been typed over. It's not been filled out.
No.
So it's dated October the 13th, 1973. So it's 2 days after the event.
You're right.
And it describes stripping Charlie and Calvin down to their underwear. And on Calvin's foot, on the underneath of his foot, they found, in inverted commas, puncture wounds. And on Charlie's arm. Bearing in mind, Calvin said they stripped him off, they took his boots off, and they stuck something in his foot. But it also mentioned a couple of photographs. Well, there were no photographs with it, but this document was fascinating. So I said to Calvin, who the hell wrote this? Because there was no name on it. He said, well, it must have been Dr. Harder. Dr. James Harder worked for the UFO group APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation, and they sent him down there. I said, well, why was it Harder? He says, well, he's the one that asked us to strip off, you know.
Right. So he would have the info, wouldn't he? He'd have written the report. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. And that was fascinating in its own right, Paul. But then about a year, maybe 18 months later, the gentleman called Mark Rodiger at the Centre for UFO Studies sent me an email and said, been looking through some files for today, Philip. I wasn't looking for this. You've probably got it anyway, but I thought I'd send you them. And it was the photographs of these marks, Calvin's foot and Charlie's arm. They were in black and white, and we knew who was who because they'd written it on the back.
Yeah.
You know? So we had both gentlemen telling us about these very, very minor injuries. I've got to be honest, Paul. They weren't, anything significant. But we then had the letter or report, whatever you want to call it.
And the photographic evidence.
And then the photos to go with it. So Absolutely. For me, that was a physical link to whatever happened to these two gentlemen that night. And they'd never seen the photographs before. Calvin was totally unaware of any of this.
No, it's fascinating. I don't think any of them would have known, but they must have wondered why they were treated differently on board this craft, with that's what we're going to call it. Do you know, had they formed any conclusions over years? You know, like with the Travis Walton case, Travis, first of all, he were abducted, but I think in later years, he thinks they actually helped him and saved his life. So I'm not saying that that's involved here, but have they any conclusions that why they were treated differently? Why Hickson saw the eye-shaped object, and Calvin saw the thing like a pack of cards, or the size of a pack of cards?
There's no idea. I mean, Calvin, throughout his life, didn't want to be associated with this. He tried to hide away, whilst Charlie was the opposite. He believed that something important was going to happen with these beings, and he was going to be part of it. And when I say something important, I mean globally.
Yeah.
You know, globally. And in the new book, Pascagoula Uncovered, I have a piece written by Calvin himself that he passed to me, but would not allow me to publish it until he died. And of course, he died in August 2023. So I've published it for the first time. Even his wife hadn't seen it up until I published it. And in there, he'd come to a similar conclusion to Charlie, but in much later life, that these creatures were indeed not of this earth. They'd gone through similar things that we may go through. When I say we, I mean we as a species, as a planet.
As in evolving
That they, you know, have gone through wars and you know, global warming, and they've solved it. They managed to get through it and solve it. And possibly they could help us go down the right path as well. Those were his conclusions. But, you know, he still wasn't pleased with how he was treated, and certain things happened.
Did they impart any knowledge to them, or were they just treated as commodities and experimented on?
At that point, Calvin was told nothing. He was shown, as part of his experience, he calls it a mirror, but it wasn't a mirror. That's the only way he can describe it. And he actually calls it the curse. Okay. Because in this mirror, they showed him things that had happened in the past, things that were happening now, and things that would happen here on Earth in the future. And that included, you know, war and pestilence and, you know, bad things if we didn't change our ways. And he actually called that the curse, because he knew in his mind what was going to happen to us in the future. And has
he left any messages that you know of that?
Well, just that, you know, we better change course, otherwise we're going to be wiped out. Be it you know, by global warming or nuclear holocaust, or both. You know, but we as a species had better shape up. Otherwise, we're going to go through the similar things that these creatures have been through themselves. And they'd managed to rescue themselves from it, if you like. So that's where he was, you know. And then in 2018, I started working with him and Dr. Irina Scott. We uncovered all kinds of things. And then Calvin died in 2023 in August. I managed to speak to him a couple of days before he died. And I said, you know, I'll carry on looking, Calvin. And I'll be the torchbearer, as will Irina.
Yeah.
And then every now and again, Paul, I'll have a look online. I'm not one for being on it all day, but I found a webpage from a journalist, local journalist in the States. Can't remember his name now. And there was some interviews with a couple of police officers who'd seen something. And then there's one with Charlie, which I'd seen before. But then there's one with Calvin. And he's obviously a bit older now. He looks, you know, 30s, 40s. And this little video is embedded into this thing. And the first half, Calvin goes over the story, which I've just told you about what happened in 1973. He adds a little bit more information to it, but nothing startling. But then he starts talking about another incident. This happened in a place called Baldwin, Louisiana, in March 1992. Now, at that time, Calvin, I believe, was working in the oil industry. And he said, we were driving. So when I said we, it was him and a colleague driving to find where their next location was going to be for their job. And he said he got this feeling. So he pulled the car over and he set off into the woods. And there's an object on the ground. It opens, this ramp comes out, and it's this female creature again.
The one that, or similar to what he saw before?
Yeah, the same one. And this time he's invited in, and he corresponds with her or talks to her, whatever way you want to put this. And she explains that they've been through war and pestilence, and they're trying to help humanity, And these ugly creatures, as he called them, these big bulky things, they were actually outside collecting plants and muck and, samples. And he called them robots. And she says, again, similar to what Charlie had said, something big's going to happen. And will it be announced, worldwide? So Calvin had forgot about his buddy back in the car or the truck, and Calvin says, I've got to leave. And as he comes out, apparently his friend turns up and he's got a tire iron, and he's going to give these what for? Because he's frightened out of his life.
Yeah.
Of course, Calvin calms him down, go back to the truck or the car, and off they go. Now I worked with and spoke with Calvin for about 5 years. And I used to speak to him, if not on Skype, once a week, via email and text messages, sometimes twice a week. He used to get up very early in the morning. So he'd say, are you available for a Skype call, Philip? Because he knew it was about lunchtime here,
Yeah.
And not once did he breathe a word of this. He had another encounter in 1993 while out on a little boat.
The same again.
Yeah. Told me all about that. He was put under hypnosis by Dr. James Harder, by Bud Hopkins, Kathleen Marden, and then another lady called Crystal Slaughter. So we have a number of recordings of him under hypnosis. Never mentions anything in 1992. I mean, not a word. But here we have him on video.
Talking about it.
Now, you have to think, well, why is he on video? Well, around about this time, Calvin told me he was earning a good income, and he had some spare cash, and he kind of thought his thoughts had changed a little bit. He thought perhaps we should let people know what happened to us. So him and Charlie, their intention was to make their own TV show. Right. Which would get interviewing abductees and people who'd seen things.
How far from the 1973 have we come now then, Philip?
Well, we're in the early 90s.
Early 90s. So it's not something they've just thought, well, we can make some money out of this. I mean,
they weren't too bothered about the money. They were going to just release it on a local cable channel. But it never happened. For whatever reason, it never happened. And I said to Calvin, who did you interview? And he couldn't remember. He's like, never told me. Perhaps one of the people that were on camera was him. Because it's the same sort of time period,
Got you.
And what I also found was a conference, again, without opening the book, I can't remember the location. But this conference in 1993, the proceedings of it, say, here's Calvin Parker, he's going to reveal all for the first time. And there's a little article to go with it. It just so happens that a colleague who I know very well in the States, a chap called Kevin Randall, probably know him for his work on the Roswell case. Yeah. Kevin was a speaker at this conference. And I said, did Calvin make a presentation? He said, no, he wasn't there. So whether he was going to go there and change his mind, or whether the conference organizer had put it in, hoping that he would come and sell a few tickets on the back of it, I don't know, but he never turned up. But in this conference proceedings, Calvin is saying, I'm going to tell you everything.
Reveal everything.
I'm going to reveal everything, and he said, so. In the new book, I put a copy of those proceedings in there, not the whole lot, just the ones relating to Calvin.
And you know, the letters that you found and you looked, or you were able to look through, weren't there some letters with reference from NASA?
Yeah, what also happened during our time of investigation, there was a lady by the name of Chelsea Norton Prince. She runs the Ocean Springs Historical Society in Mississippi. And she's interested in the case. She even met Calvin and bought a book off him. And they have a Facebook page, and she put a couple of articles on it. So one of the members, a lady by the name of Bethany, said, my mum and dad used to own Charlie Hickson's house. They bought it in 2011 when he died. And in it was these boxes of letters. And she says, I've got 2. Do you want them, Chelsea? She said, not half. She had more at one point, but she'd given them away and she couldn't remember who she'd given the other stuff. Anyway, Chelsea contacted me and said, basically, do you want a copy? And I said, yeah. And in no time at all, Paul, she'd digitized them.
Transcribed loads for you, didn't she?
She digitized 150 some odd pieces of paper. And in amongst all this, a lot of it is just general correspondence, but in amongst it is a letter from a gentleman who was a NASA physicist.
That's right, yeah.
And I checked him out online, and he is who he says he is. And he said, I asked my boss at NASA to look into what happened to you when it happened, and they just declined. They just said no. So this, letter is we've published. I've kept his name there, so there's no, no shenanigans. No, it's not his address, but I've kept his name in it. And I did write to that address just in case. I never got a reply. But I thought, if I don't do it, I'll be nattered to death. You know what I mean? It'll bug me.
I wondered how in 2025, 2024, if such a case had come about, if somebody within NASA had have asked their superiors, do you think anything had changed today, Philip? Do you think that's
what I would say is, when we get through to today, we've heard all of these disclosure lobby and the briefings in Congress and so on, what's allegedly happening behind closed doors, what have you. But I don't know if you've noticed, Paul, but none of them have mentioned the abduction phenomena.
Absolutely, they haven't, no.
And I don't think it's by accident. In fact, I know it's not. It's been done on purpose.
So is this because it would frighten people, do you think?
Well, it goes back to when the term UFO was invented. That was invented by the United States Air Force because the term flying saucer was a silly name. So they called it UFOs to try and give it a bit more of a serious angle.
Yeah.
The disclosure lobby have done it themselves again. They've done exactly the same thing. They now call it a UAP, to try and make it sound more serious. And again, if you look back through UFO history, the arguments in the 1950s were, where are these things from? Are they man-made? Are they from elsewhere? Or are they the Russians? They didn't really want to say they're not man-made. And they had a big problem when people started claiming to, have encountered creatures, beings, whatever you want to call them, because they thought it would, make the subject even sillier.
Yeah.
So we have the same thing happening now. And
do you, I'll not say in your lifetime, I'll say in our lifetime, do you think we'll see disclosure, or do you think it's already just happening?
Well, I don't think, if we talk about disclosure, you're assuming that they've got something to disclose in the first place.
Maybe they've got knowledge. They might not have, as in an item to disclose. Do you mean knowledge and something to share with the world? Well,
not really, Paul, because again, if you think about it, we don't investigate UFOs. But we investigate sightings of UFOs.
Okay.
Somebody calls you tonight. By the time you get there, it's over and done with.
Yeah, it's over.
Done with. So you're not investigating a UFO. You're investigating an alleged sighting
after the event, kind of thing. Yeah.
What I did wonder, they've had these so-called whistleblowers none of whom can put anything definitive on the table for us to examine, of course. I wondered, they're supposedly setting up a safe channel where any of the military can report whatever they may have encountered.
Without reproach, like, you know.
Yeah, no stigma attached to it, all secret and all this. I asked the question, never got any reply. What would happen if a serving military pilot in the United States today contacted NASA or APRO as the other organization, or whoever the hell they've set up, and said, not only did I see this thing, I was taken on board it, and this happened to me. I wondered what the reaction would be.
I don't know. I don't think it'd get that far, would it? I think they'd close that down, wouldn't they?
I don't know, because supposedly they have a way for them to report this without any stigma, without any fear of retribution or anything.
But would that kind of information get to the ears of the populace? I'm not sure it would.
Well, I'm not sure it would, but I'm just wondering what the powers would be, what their reaction would be.
But surely they know these things anyway, or some people within the governments of the world already know what we're just wondering about now. They already know.
How do they know? How do they know, Paul?
Well, what you're just saying is there's somebody, they've set up this safe place for people to talk and report what they know. People will have already reported those kinds of things.
Yeah, same thing that's been reported to me. Same things that's been reported to you. They have nothing any different or any more compelling than you or I have.
Well, you make a good point.
It's as simple as that. So when these people talk about disclosure, they're not talking about a bunch of files of sightings and so on, like Blue Book's files or whatever. They're all released anyway. They're talking in a roundabout manner that they've got the powers that be, or the government. I don't know which government they're talking about, but the government has definitive proof that we are being visited or are being visited by non-human intelligences, as they call it now. They've even changed that. They don't want to call them aliens anymore, but that's what we're talking about. So, they believe they've got definitive evidence and proof of this, and that at some point they're going to release it, i.e. disclosure.
And do you think it's going to happen?
Well, no, because I'm not so sure they've got anything more than you or I've got, Paul. I've got some fascinating files, and I know you have.
I've got some incredible bodies of work here, especially Humminbee, which is, and do you know, I don't mind saying it, the military were fully aware Humminbee were going to happen.
Yeah.
They were there. And it weren't a military exercise.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to talking about it at the conference that's coming up. Just to jump back to Calvin and Charles Hickson for a moment, and once again, you probably covered it, but when the story broke, when they got pulled in, when they went into work the next day, did they ever find out who broke the story? Was it the sheriff?
No.
I know you said that he protested that it wasn't him.
No, because Calvin originally thought it might have been Charlie. But in my discussions with him, decades later, he wondered if it was somebody on using one of those scanners where you can listen to, incoming chat with the police, the local taxi firm, and so on. He was wondering if it might have been somebody like that. He still had a hint that he thought it might have been Charlie, but Charlie always denied it. So
I only bring that up because a strange one, 1963, I think it was 63 or 67. Sorry, I can't be no closer because there were a lot happened in both years around East Yorkshire. But the little fishing cobble, the Imperialist, 3 men, I've talked about it before, pulling crab pots at the bottom of Crab Rocks at Bempton, all duck because they see a reflection in the water and look up. There's a little football-sized object above their heads, and I don't mean miles in sky, above their heads, and it literally just shot off at great speed silently and disappeared just underneath where the RAF Bempton is. So that was still fully operational. And they got their fishing cobble, which were called the Imperialist, which is still in Bridlington Harbour today, but it were in Flamborough at that time. When they got back to shore, tiny little fishing village, Flamborough, you've been there, Philip.
Yes,
you know what Flamborough Head's like. There's men waiting for them.
Yeah.
There's three men, two called Jewett, surnames, and a Stevenson. No radios. They've nothing to ring anybody or connect with anybody. It's 1963, I think, and it's July. And there's men waiting for them to find out what they've seen. And how's that possible?
Right, exactly. I'll give you another example. One of the things Irene and I have done, we've managed to either find or speak to a whole raft of witnesses to events in and around the area. One of them was a chap by the name of Lewis Lee. Calvin was doing a book signing in Pascagoula. This old boy came up, bought a book, paid Calvin's wife, and he said, I saw something that night. And off he went with no idea who he was. But fortunately for us, somebody was taking photographs and we had a picture of him. So I put it on social media, say, anybody know this gentleman? A local person contacted me and said, yeah, I know who it is. I'll ask him if he'll speak to you. He agreed, got his phone number, and he was Lewis Lee. Now, Mr. Lee was a crane operator. And on the opposite side of the Pascagoula River was the shipyard, and he was working that night. And he said, as soon as I got into my cab, Philip, which is about, he said, well, it's about 10 or 12 feet off the ground.
Oh, well, I've got that, Mr. Lee, the crane operator. That was a question. So we're going there. Yeah, thank you.
Well, he said I could see this thing come down over the river. So we're not talking something up in the sky. This thing is out over the river. And he watched it for some time. And he says it's the damnedest thing you've ever seen. He said it was almost like you could see through it at some point. And he only took his eyes off it because his mate down below shouted at him, like, what the hell are you doing? Words to that effect. Anyway. He says, when I look back, it had gone. So I said to him, I just came out of my mouth, Paul. I said, did you report it to anybody? He says, Philip, this is 1973. There is no Ghostbusters to ring. Who the hell am I going to tell? He says, I told my family, and that was it. Sadly, Mr. Lee is no longer with us. He passed away, but we managed to get a couple of interviews with him. And, people said, he was there that night, but just on the other side of the river.
Are you still optimistic, Philip, that there's what we're going back almost 50 years, are we? That there's more witnesses out there? Do you still think there's some still?
Well, I know there is, because I've seen discussions on various Facebook pages, and somebody will say, I've seen this and I've seen that. And they haven't allowed an interview.
I was just going to say, without naming names, that you're quite frustrated, aren't you, that there's some good information there and you can't get to it. Yeah,
I mean, I just looked at a YouTube video the other day, and there's a young lady there talking about it, and I said, we'd love to speak to you. She saw something. She was only a toddler at the time. Literally, she said, I saw something that night. I've never forgotten it. And I just left a message saying, we'd love to speak to you, don't need to use your name. But one of the witnesses that go on, you're going to ask me a question.
Before we get, he's kind of underrated. Them comments are invaluable, aren't they? Because there's people looking for information for their little bit of the jigsaw on certain cases, and when you look through them comments, you can find jewels, absolute diamonds of information.
Well, that's where one of the main witnesses has come. We've managed to obtain. In the early days, when Calvin came out of the woodwork in 2018, and I published his book, he did an interview with a local journalist called Karen Nelson. She was quite skeptical, but by the time she'd finished talking to Calvin, she'd changed her mind. And she made wrote it up for the newspaper, but she made a little video as well, Paul. And somebody grabbed that and put it on YouTube. So I'm reading through all, there were hundreds, if not thousands of comments, but I managed to read one. And it says, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night. They too saw the UFO. Words to that effect.
This is Maria, is it?
Yeah. So I left a little message. I found this person. It was a young woman. And I said, could I speak to your mum and dad? She said, I'll ask them. She come back, yeah, it's Maria and Jerry Blair. Here's the telephone number. So I phoned them up, spoke to Maria first. And Maria says, yeah, my husband, Jerry, he worked offshore. And his company used to service the oil rigs. She says, we were sat, a little boat was sat there that night. We're in the car, we're just waiting for the boss to come because it was late. And he said, it got dark. She said, we saw this blue thing come down the river. And she says, it stopped on the opposite side of the river. And it looked like it was looking for somebody or it was lost. And at this point, her and her husband decided to walk down this little pier to put his clothing on this little boat. The boss still hadn't turned up. And she says, as we're walking along, there's this splash in the water. And out of the water, literally right into my face here, right to my face, came this grey man. And she says it went back down in the water and never came up again. She run down the pier, she threw her husband's stuff on it, and she thinks at this point it was around about 9 o'clock at night. And she was terrified. And she legged it back to the car. By the time she got there, it was midnight. So there was so anyway, I spoke to Jerry as well. Jerry was, a quiet fella, shall we say. And he just confirmed he'd seen the blue light. He then took ill, and he confirmed he'd actually seen the grey humanoid, as he said. And he was taken into hospital, and he was seriously ill. And he was going to have an operation. They weren't sure if he was going to live.
Right.
So we got his wife, Maria, to phone me there and then on the mobile. And he said, Mr. Mantle, I lied. I seen exactly the same as my wife. I lied. I apologize. And Maria's actually filming it on the phone as well. So we have the video of him. He sat there on the bed in the hospital. Fortunately, he survived the operation, but it was only a temporary stopgap. He was going to die. Okay. So it was kind of a deathbed confession, if you like, Paul. He started to tell his wife what had happened. And they too had an abduction experience. And Maria said to me, I could see something out of my peripheral vision. What she could see was what was happening to her husband and this blue light and these creatures.
Wow.
And even though he was dying, she was as mad as hell with him.
For keeping it?
For not telling her. And he said, I just wanted to protect you. I didn't want people to think we were nuts. So
you can understand his reasoning, but
absolutely, he died, passed away, and then Maria knew that Calvin had been under hypnosis at some point, and she asked about it, and I said, forget it. So a while later, she came back and asked about it again. I said, well, look, okay, I can't make any promises because I'm several thousand miles across the Atlantic, but I'll see what I can do. So I just searched online, Paul, and I found a couple of local hypnotherapists. I emailed them. I didn't tell them what we wanted it for. And one lady by the name of Crystal Slaughter said, yeah, I can do regressive hypnosis. So we arranged it, and we did it at Calvin's house because Calvin had now met Maria, became on friendly terms. Maria knew that Calvin had been under hypnosis before, so he knew what to expect. So the hypnotherapist, we didn't tell her anything apart from a date, a time, and a location. That was it. And we had it filmed as well. I had a professional cameraman to film it. And she put Maria under hypnosis. And she was petrified. Cutting a long story short, she claimed under hypnosis that these creatures were interested in her eggs, that they'd harvested some of her eggs, that they wanted to make creatures that could walk amongst us, but look exactly like us. In other words, we wouldn't be able to spot them. And that was what she said. And she said that night, the intended targets from these creatures were actually her and her husband, and not Calvin and Charlie, because she says we had a pre-planned time to be there on that date, whereas Charlie and Calvin only decided to go there on their way home from work that night.
So that's
And they were like collateral damage, if you like.
Mm.
And so that was fascinating.
Did she ever say that did she ever get revisited by these beings and told that they had used her
Let me
eggs?
just check these. I have some medication to take.
Okay, well, while
It's
you're
only a mouthful.
It's not a problem. I saw somebody in chat say, is there a name for Philip's new book? And I know we're going to do that because Leslie's going to put some pictures up, but I've got the book.
Yeah. Pascagoula Uncovered.
Yep, Pascagoula Uncovered, and it's quite a substantial book, to be quite honest. It's not as big as this doorstop.
That was the first one. Beyond reasonable doubt.
It is smaller as well. There's a smaller version of it, Philip, isn't there? So
there is. So sometime later, I wanted to get Maria sat down and be interviewed. You know,
okay.
Irina, my colleague Dr. Irina Scott, had communicated with Maria on and off for a long time, usually by Facebook Messenger and so on. So I asked Chelsea, the young lady called Chelsea, could you do this for me? I said, you can just use your iPhone. That's good enough quality for me. So she arranged it, and I sent Chelsea a list of questions. Two things happened. One, Maria said, in fact, three things happened. Maria said she had seen them again. She was driving through a place nearby with her 10-year-old granddaughter, and she'd seen one of these things over the buildings opposite. And she couldn't understand. There were people coming out of this church.
They couldn't.
They didn't see it, but her granddaughter did.
Right.
She claims that the creatures are in touch with her, and they will direct her to certain locations, and she'll just wake up. She'll be there, and she'll just wake up. No idea what's happened. She says they control her mind at times. Now, one of the questions Chelsea asked her, she said, when did you first meet? I want to repeat this. When did you first meet Calvin Parker? And she said, I first saw Calvin Parker when he was abducted. She claims that she could see what was happening on the other side of the river. She didn't know who these people were, Charlie and Calvin. And she said she saw this thing come down behind them, and she thought it was man-made.
I see, yeah.
Until she heard it on the news the following day or the day after, you know. So she said, I first saw Calvin Parker when he was abducted.
And before Calvin passed away, did these two ever meet?
Yeah, they met several times.
I know she saw him, but actually
in
1973, but there's no communication then. They're both sort of...
No, not at the time, because in 2019, the city of Pascagoula placed a historical marker near the spot of the event. It was a local charity that raised the money of it. We helped a little bit with some of the wording.
You getting involved in it, yeah.
And Maria came to that unveiling. It was done by the local mayor, and she then spoke to the local news and told them about seeing this blue light. But that was all she told them. And her husband was there. Again, Jerry didn't say an awful lot, you know. But what is interesting, I communicated with both of her daughters, and they said, you know, Mum and Dad told us about the UFO sighting down the years, but nothing else. So even Jerry had not mentioned it to his daughters.
It must be difficult, you know, for some people to even get their heads around the fact that what you've just said, you know, they wanted to create part human, part alien hybrids that potentially could be walking amongst us.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean I can get my head around it and understand it, but I can believe that because there's so many people said similar things. But it also must be quite haunting for a lady like Maria to think that there may be a part of her walking around.
Well,
you know,
the way it affected her is A, she was scared, and B, she started looking at her own children, her two daughters, and thinking, you know, and sadly he's not here anymore, but the late Howard Hughes, he interviewed Maria on the telephone one night for his Show the Unexplained. And he gave me permission to use that. So I have transcribed that in the new book as well, plus the interview that Chelsea did with Maria. And the way I work, Paul, is look, this is what we've uncovered. This is what people are saying. Here it is. There's nothing omitted. You draw your own conclusions. I'm not telling you this is the fact, this is the truth, this is amazing. You decide for yourself. And it's the same with Maria and Jerry's testimony.
But after all that research, though, Philip, I mean, and how long you've been looking into this subject? I mean, it was teens, weren't it, when you first had an interest in it?
1980, I've actually started.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, you must come away with. You must come away with a feeling. Well, you wouldn't have stuck with Pascagoula if you didn't think it was the real deal, would you?
Well, it wasn't a question of sticking with it. It was the fact once it started to become unveiled, it took on a life of its own, and it's just snowballed. And Calvin and I used to just sit and shake our heads and say, what the hell are we going to find out next? Because I'd known so many people around the world, and I would ask them and be polite, Paul, what this case and these last 3 books have shown, that if you are polite and you work with people in the right way, you know, this is what you can achieve.
Yeah.
Because I haven't done this all by myself. People have had to cooperate with us. I mean, Calvin had forgotten about being hypnotized with Bud Hopkins. And we uncovered the tapes. And we found that Charlie had gone under hypnosis with Bud. And we got the tape recordings of that. Dr. James Harder, he's the guy that, you know, looked them over in their underwear and wrote that 1-page letter about them. He worked for APRO. They were the major UFO group of the time.
Yeah.
But the APRO files, of which there are several thousand, Paul, were in a facility where nobody could get access to them. I knew the guy that had them, and he was very polite, but there was no getting hold of him. Out of the blue, he donated the whole lot to a gentleman by the name of David Marler in Albuquerque. David is the director of the National UFO Historical Records Center.
I see.
And so I know David. All my files are actually with David. They're all my paper files, that photographs, slides, everything. He has the lot. So David knew I'm involved in the research into Pascagoula. He says, Philip, hey, have you got these? And there were recordings of Hynek interviewing the sheriff. There's Dr. James Harder answering questions from a press conference. We found that Hickson and Parker, mainly Hickson, were also put under some kind of stress evaluation test. Supposedly, if you listen to somebody telling a story, you put it through this machine, you can tell whether they're lying or not. It's a bit like a
lie detector test.
A bit like a lie detector test, but that's, you know, you're wired up to this. This is based on your voice. Right, found all the information about that. So that's why the book subtitle is called Witnesses, Files, and Audio Tapes. Because we had all these audio tapes, never seen the light of day. And on one of them is Calvin's hypnosis done on the 12th of October, 1970. So the day after, by Dr. James Harder.
Wow.
So it's, you know, and of course, David just digitized it for me and sent it. And, you know, they are historically fascinating.
Jumped into it fairly quick, though, don't you think, Philip? If the sighting and the experience were the 11th, were it? It
was on the 11th, yeah.
So, and he went under hypnosis on the 12th?
Well, Dr. James Harder arrived there.
Yeah, I see, yeah.
And he asked them, and they initially said no.
Right.
And they said, why? He said, because we don't want anybody messing with our mind. So they actually got one of the other employees in the office at the time and put him under hypnosis just to show, because their only version of hypnosis may have been something they've seen in a theater or on TV.
Yeah.
You know, where you're a chicken and you lay a square egg, that kind of stuff. So he convinced them, but Calvin was only under hypnosis for about 11 minutes. And he just kept saying he was scared. A lot of it. I'm scared. I'm frightened.
He's a young lad, though, isn't he? He's still 18, 19 years old.
We haven't found the tape of Charlie Hickson under hypnosis. But that's one of the reasons why Harder was sent there, because he was trained in hypnosis.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
In a moment, I want to go to some questions if possible, but I just want to have a look at the names again, because we've got Mandrake, Simon Riley, Stargazer Eternal, Laura, my daughter's in. Good to see you, Laura. I think Julie Parker said hello earlier. We know Alison's doing moderating, Scotch Mist. I can only see that many names, people, so I do apologise, but thanks for the support. We've got like 220, 230 people all riveted to what Philip's sharing with us, and we'll jump to Les if that's okay, Les. Brilliant.
Yeah, got some great questions in as always, and an ever inquisitive stream. People in the stream, they get some great questions in. So I've got to say, I've got a question from myself actually, Philip.
Yeah.
When you said Calvin and Charles couldn't remember, or they didn't know how long they'd been abducted, then it's a bit like a triangulation thing. I know you've only got the one witness called Maria and her husband at the time, did she mention 9 o'clock? Did you say she's at 9 o'clock?
That was one of the
I'll get to the question. Can anything be derived for? Can you work out how long there was actually abducted from this?
What Charlie did, he wrote a book in 1983, which is how I got into all this. It's called UFO Contact at Pascagoula. And it hardly didn't sell a copy, And I went to buy a copy. You could buy a second-hand copy floating around on eBay, and they wanted a fortune for it. But anyway, being a tight Yorkshireman, I bought one in the end, And I got the permission to republish it. And I knew Charlie was dead, but I thought Calvin was still alive, and I didn't know. I was assuming. Anyway, he was still alive, and I found him. So initially, my only contact with Calvin was to try and get an interview with him to put in the back of this book. So that's how it all started. But in that book, UFO Contact at Pascagoula, Charlie writes it with another chap called William Mendez, who was a university lecturer. One of the things they tried to do was to say, right, what time did you get to the sheriff's office?
Yeah.
And then try and trace it back to see what time and things had happened. And the sort of time was about 30 or 40 minutes, an estimate of how long they were in there. So it wasn't a long time. It seemed long. I mean, because they were both terrified to death, and neither of them wore a watch. So about 30 or 40 minutes is an estimate. That's the best we've been able to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, then we'll start with the questions. Stephen Collins is asking, evening, Philip, after their encounter, did they have any health issues at all?
Well, Charlie said and Calvin said they had problems with their eyesight. Because Calvin was a welder, and he said it's almost like you get a welding flash, and you've not had your mask down when you're welding, and you get that image on you. It's like some silly bugger looks at the sun. And they said they had that for a few days. But in later life, Calvin had open heart surgery, he had a stroke, and eventually he got cancer in his kidneys, which spread to his lungs and killed him. Calvin did wonder, I have to be honest, he did wonder if any of these illnesses might have been as a direct result, but there's no way we can tell. He wasn't old when he died, he was only still in his 60s, wasn't an old man, but that's all I can say, really. Okay,
then. I know you just touched on this a little bit earlier. Rod is saying, Philip, did either of them have any medical examinations carried out on them after the event?
Yeah, they were both sent. The Pascagoula River is also called the Singing River. And we go back in time for this. I think it's important, but it's often overlooked. It's folklore. The whole area back in time was people of an indigenous population lived there, the Indians, as we call them, the Red Indians, we call them. And there was 2 tribes, and they've been friendly for a long time, but it started to kick off, and one tribe thought, we're going to get wiped out. So what they did en masse, they walked into the river to commit suicide, and they were singing a song. So every now and again, the river is supposedly makes this noise, which is the ghosts of the deceased Indians singing. Hence, it's called the Singing River as well. What is interesting is that when Charlie and Calvin were stood on that little pier with their lines cast, the first inclination that was something wrong, they heard a little zipping noise. So whether that is the noise that the river makes, the Singing River, but the connection is they were taken by the sheriff to the Singing River Hospital for an examination, and we know they went there as well because in the first book that Paul took up, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, there's an interview there we found on video. It's one of the people who worked in what we call accident and emergency, the ER department. He worked next door to it, in the X-ray department, and he saw Charlie and Calvin come in, and he chatted with Calvin, and he said the young fellow was scared to death, and he said even then there was newspapermen trying to find them. So they went to the Singing River Hospital the day after, and one of the things I got Calvin to do, I actually wrote the letter and I emailed it to him. He just had to sign it. We sent it to the Singing River Hospital to see if they still had any records back in 1973, but they didn't have any. A lot of the places in that area were underwater in Hurricane Katrina, which I think was 2008. I may be wrong on the date, including Calvin's house. Calvin lived by the river. His house was under 12 feet of water and he lost everything, So even the police department lost everything. So all their records on anything from that time period is gone because of the hurricane. So we drew a blank on getting, historical records, but we have confirmation from a third party that they did go to the hospital.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. And I'll put this question on, even though we've discussed most of this. Studio 11 production, I understand several other people saw or reported UFOs that same evening from the same area. Did these correlate with the Hickson and Parker as you described?
There were a lot of people around the area saw things. One of the gentlemen who we found is a chap called Charles Rusty Anderson. And Mr. Anderson had been out with his wife that night, and he was on the Pascagoula River. There's 2 bridges. So where they were fishing, there was a bridge either side of them. And Mr. Anderson's driving over the bridge, and he said, we saw these blue lights. And he said, I thought it was an aeroplane going to crash, because they were actually looking down on it from the bridge. So it was below them. And that is approximately where Charlie and Calvin were. Because one of the things I got Calvin to do was to walk along the bridge and photograph the area where it happened now. As it looks now, there's no pier there now. It's just all nice, it's all grassed off. But amazingly, where the place was, there was somebody actually fishing that day when Calvin walked over there, because he's got his umbrella up. He's a big. So Mr. Anderson was in the same spot, but looking down.
I see.
Looking down on it. So a lot of the sightings were different, I have to be honest, but a lot of them also talk about this blue light, which is what Charlie and Calvin saw. Now, I'll give you an example. We did a couple of documentaries on this case. Mr. Anderson was interviewed for one. And when he was interviewed, he put a little posting on Facebook. And there's a few comments under there. And there's a lady with a completely different name. She said, oh, I saw something that night. So I contacted her in private. She agreed to be interviewed. She's called Pamela Rayleigh Eves. Now, she lives in the opposite direction from the bridge. So she's a mile down the river the other way. She says, I was putting my children to bed and I'm closing the bedroom curtains, and our building looks out over the river and I could see this blue light. Pamela was actually the cousin of Mr. Anderson, and neither of them had ever spoken about it to each other. And Rusty also told me, he says, the next day I went to visit my aunt who lived down by the river, and she said, "You never guess what I saw last night," you know? And of course, it was this blue-coloured thing. So there are, with some of the sightings, there are some similarities. Others are totally different as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And Stephen Collin is asking, Philip, do you think they had previous encounters in early life at all?
Yeah. Well, what is interesting is when we started digging, what happened was Calvin had an encounter in 1993. And a mate of his knew a little bit about UFOs. And he says, "Do you know there's a chap called Bud Hopkins who specialises in this kind of stuff? He's speaking at a UFO conference in Florida this weekend." So Calvin and his mate got in the car and drove to Florida from Mississippi unannounced. The conference was in a hotel. Calvin would not go in. His mate went in, found Bud Hopkins and told him what was what. Bud, being the lovely man that he was, says, "Here's my hotel key. You go back to my room, and as soon as I've done, I'll meet you there." And he did. And somehow he managed to persuade Calvin to undergo hypnosis, and he tape recorded it. And we have a copy. What came out in this is, he told us about everything that had happened to him in 1993, told us about what had happened in 1973, and then he told us about two little things that had happened when he was a young fella. The connection between them all is this female. She was observed in all four encounters, and then in the 1992 encounter that we found out later about. So the common denominator is this female all the way through. Charlie also reported two strange happenings when he was a young fella as well. He wasn't with Calvin, he was, at home. So yes, other things did happen. Sorry, Paul.
How old was he, or did they think he was in the first encounters?
I think we're 9 or 10 years old.
So that kind of must tell us all then that all of this were pre-planned.
Well,
don't you think?
I wouldn't
for the female to follow him through life.
Well, I don't know. That would be an assumption.
We can only surmise, can't we? Yeah, we can only surmise, but
I don't know because Charlie didn't see the female.
No, Charlie didn't, but
Calvin did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he called her that bitch. He in the 1993 encounter, he got hold of her around the neck and banged her head against the wall and wanted to kill her. He said, "I've had enough of this, interfering in my life. You're going to die." And he said, "I looked round for a door," and he said, "If there was a door, we were both going out of it. I don't care how high we were, enough was enough."
And what? So he got hold of this female alien allegedly.
Yeah.
So how did that end then? Because surely, if he's apprehending her, if he's got hold of her, then he's in control.
But the big guy. You're forgetting the big ugly creatures that were there.
Yeah, you're throwing that in. Yeah.
Yeah, and he said they just come, touch me. He had this funny noise, and I'm paralyzed. I can't move a muscle. It's the only thing I could move with my eyes. Couldn't even close them. Could just move my eyeballs, and that was it over. But so they both had encounters. I think it was 9. I may be wrong about the year, but also Charlie had a daylight sighting after 1973. I think it was 74, 75. And it's called the Mother's Day sighting, I think, because they were actually going to either see his mother or his wife's mother for Mother's Day. And he had all the family with him. And Charlie had these messages. He became almost a contactee kind of thing, saying something big was going to happen. And they all say they saw this thing coming down, and he thought, this is it. Whatever this big thing is, this is it. And his family won't let Charlie get out of the car because they thought, if they check him this time, he might not come back. And that was in daylight, and all his family saw it.
Wow.
Okay, thanks for that, Philip. And some of the early stuff will dovetail into this question from Audacious Dave. Philip, I wonder if Calvin and Charles felt they were chosen for a reason or simply picked up at random.
Well, certainly Charlie did in the early days. He thought, because he had these messages delivered, and that something big was going to happen on Earth,
Mm.
and he would be part of it. He didn't know what the hell it was. I'll give you an idea how his mind worked. So in 1981, a chap by the name of Stephanos Panagiotakis.
That's the question, but so we may as well do it. Yeah, just fill it in some detail. Then.
Stephanos was in the Greek Merchant Navy. He's a radio operator, but he's also a UFO researcher, and he used to write for a magazine in Greece. And he was mad keen on the Pascagoula case. His ship docked in Pascagoula.
Yeah.
And they got delayed, so rather than having a couple of days there, he actually had a week shore leave, and he set off to find Charlie Hickson and get an interview with him. And he went to the police, and they gave him his address, and Stephanos literally just turned up on his doorway and knocked on the door. And the way Charlie reacted was, I've got this Greek man, Greek are known for their ancient past and this, that, and the other. He thought this was part of what was supposed to happen. And Stephanos got an interview and he recorded it. But what the police also said, when we talk about other witnesses, I'm going off schedule a bit here from the
That's
question.
fine.
But they said, have you spoken to Pastor Sigalis? No. Well, here's his address. And again, Stephanos knocked on the door, and this chap was called, he was of Greek origin, he was a local pastor, and he, come on in, son, and he interviewed him. What was happening on that night of October the 11th, 1973, Pastor Sigalis and a chap called Don Broadus, who was part of the police and the probation service, and a young lady, a church volunteer, were on their way to a church-organised meeting for people who had alcohol problems. And this young lady in the back of the car, she was the first to see it. This blue thing is coming, and it went right across the road in front of them. Stephanos took all the details down, he typed it all up, and he even got a photograph taken at the scene, and they drew the picture of the UFO on it. It doesn't half look like what Charlie and Calvin saw. Sadly, these gentlemen had died, but Stephanos provided us with this transcript. So we knew the pastor had seen it. We knew Don Broadus had seen it. He'd since passed away. But what about this young lady in the back? I managed to find her name in a newspaper. Briefly mentioned her. And I found her online, but it was an account that hadn't been used for years. I found an old photograph of her. She was a teacher in Pascagoula. She wasn't from the area, and she was a local volunteer at the church. So I forgot about it. I went back an eon later, looked at the same account, and it gave a name of a church. And I thought, hang on, I'll just Google that. And the church was in Maryland, still going. So the church has got its own website, and I'm scanning through it, and there's 2 sermons you could download. This lady was called Joanne Hallmark, and there's 2 sermons by 2 men called Hallmark. And I'm thinking, could that be her sons? So I emailed the church. There was a generic email address, didn't tell them what I wanted. I just said I was looking to find this lady. She'd worked with the Pastor Sigalis. About 3 or 4 weeks went by. They come back. Yeah, here she is. So then I told her what I was interested in. She confirmed it all. She sent us a recent photograph of herself now in her 70s. And then, of course, my colleague, Dr. Irina Scott, interviewed her on the phone. Hey, presto. So from Stephanos, we managed to find a new witness that he'd written about, and then we found a supporting witness to the same event who was sat in the back of the car.
Amazing. There ends the lesson from Detective Mantle. That's a great bit of work there, Philip.
Well, but it just shows you again, Paul, what I said earlier. If you work together, if you're polite, I didn't know Stephanos. I ended up publishing a little book that he did about his trip to Pascagoula. And fortunate, he'd still got copies of all this stuff. He sent me photographs of him and Charlie, him and the pastor, and we found another witness out of it.
Fabulous. More questions, Les, please.
Amazing. Yeah, and I know you've just touched on some of this. Philip Pereira is asking, Calvin mentioned further abductions / meetings. Do you know anything about these, Philip?
Yeah, like I said, I found this one about 1992, which none of us had any idea about. No, I mean, nobody, not even his wife, Waynette. She was the first person I asked. She said, I have no idea. And it's fascinating. But then there was the event in 1993. Calvin said he went out fishing to a little island nearby in a little boat, not some great big thing. He said, only going for a few hours. So I just took a bottle of water and a sandwich, and he was fishing away. And he said there was a cloud above him, but this cloud opened and it wasn't a cloud. So he's back on board this thing. It's the same creatures, and it's this female, you know. And like I said, Calvin towards the end said, I've had enough of this shit, you know. And he managed to be relaxed rather than, you know. And he got hold of her and thought, I'm going to kill this bitch. You know, that was his intention. And he was banging her head against the wall. He said this black liquid came out, but then the big guy touched him and he was paralyzed again. And that's what then led him to go and see Bud Hopkins. So we have more information about that. What I did, there's a book in between the two that Paul's shown there. It's called Pascagoula 1973, the hypnosis transcripts. And I've transcribed all the different hypnosis sessions with them. If you buy the Kindle of that, about half of the hypnosis sessions are on their reel. So it's the real recordings. It's the one with Bud Hopkins, the one with Kathleen Marden. They're all on there. So you can hear the words coming yourself. Some of them aren't in the greatest of condition. You've got to listen.
Audio. We've got audio of the transcripts. Of
the ones that we can't put on there, they're just too poor. We've transcribed those. The others I've just left them, Paul. Just put the actual recordings on there so you can hear it for yourself.
Yeah.
So that's not a sales pitch.
No.
Thinking, how do I make things available? That was the best way to do it.
Well, I'm sure Les has got more questions, but what do you think, Les? Maybe Philip can tell us about where we can get these books.
Yes, I was just coming on to that. You must be a man reader. So we've got your book on screen from Amazon.co.uk. And now, obviously, you've got a Kindle version as well, and which it says on there. But I think somebody was mentioning there was a bit of a problem with the Kindle version.
Yeah, what people have to realise, if they're going to download the Kindle, Amazon do not support every Kindle device that you have.
Okay.
And what they do make available, if you can't read it, they have a free player that you can download. Because when I started to download the Kindles myself to listen to them, although I'd already listened to them previously, I had to download a little bit of software so I could read them.
So it's suitable for your device.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, that clears that up. But yeah, it's available on Amazon. If you guys, I know a couple of people in the chat said they're going to buy it, Philip. So that's great news. And
are all the other books, Les? Are they without consent? Is that on there as well, Philip? And
yeah, I mean, you know, all of my books are on Amazon. You'll find me. If you just stick my name in, you'll find them there. No problem. You'll find some of the original issue of Without Consent, you know, Going for a Song. But yeah, they're all on Amazon. You can't miss it.
Yeah, and I think if you just click your name at the bottom left hand, just see there is a hyperlink there to take you to all your books what are on there.
Brilliant.
So that's good. And let's have a look then. So a little bit of advertising for yourself, Paul. You've got some books on sale.
Yeah, well, the Kindle versions of these books are for sale on Amazon as well. I don't have an audio version, but there's a lot of people asking, so might pick Philip's brains on that one.
What I will suggest you have a look. You'll have an Amazon account, with KDP.
Yeah.
Have a look on there, because just recently, and I was looking at something myself. What Amazon have done now, they're using AI to make an audio book of certain books, and you literally click on the link, Paul, choose one of the voices from it, press the voice, and it's done as an audio book within an hour.
Brilliant. I tell you what, Philip, will it do Yorkshire? Probably won't understand that. But no, that's great. I'll have a look at that. But yeah, they're available on Amazon. They're also available at the truthproof.uk website, and they're for sale on eBay. We've also got the documentary Wolflands that myself and Les have done. Oh, he's got that there, and that's available just the same. That's on Amazon Prime, or you can buy them from truthproof.uk or eBay. As soon as I get an order, they're sent straight out. So that's about where we're at with that. So thank you very much, Les.
Yeah, and I might just get this question in from Marky Mark, and we'll put that on the screen. Sorry, a bit of an odd question, a bit off topic, but do Paul and Philip think that the alien human hybrids that the public claim to have met, do these hybrids know they are actual hybrids?
That would be a great question, wouldn't it? A great question.
I thought that actually when we were on about it, but go on, Philip. Sorry.
Well, it reminds me, this question reminds me of a film called Moon. And it's actually directed by David Bowie's son. Mm. It's a science fiction film. So the guy's up there, and he's up there for years. And they're supposed to send a replacement. So the guy goes out and says, yeah, we're going to get a replacement. But they don't. He's actually killed off, and they have a hybrid. They make another copy of him who doesn't know that he's been up there all those years, you know. And I also watched it again just the other night, a film called The Prestige. And it actually stars David Bowie as Nikola Tesla. And it's two magicians are competing with each other. And one of them is the instant transport trick. So you've got two doors on the stage. You open the door, you walk through it, close it, and then immediately you walk out the other door. You can't run that fast.
So how's he doing?
How did they do it? Well, Nikola Tesla, I'll tell you the spoiler here. He built a machine, and it's a replica. So every time the guy goes in the door, he falls through a trap and he's dead. But they've already made a copy of him who comes out the other door. And it's a perfect replica. But he does know what's happening, you know? So that's a great question. I honestly don't have an answer to that.
Well, I did think it, and it is a great question, and I did think it, and that's the reason when we were on about Maria and taking her eggs, and because I said that's potentially it's frightening, and can you imagine people in audience, people listening to this now, people listening to it afterwards, if these beings are walking against around us and with us, if they actually know. And it's just one great deception. You could even marry one. I might have married an alien. There you go.
I'm certainly I've dated a few, Paul. I'm just pretty sure of that.
I'll always in chat.
I'll tell you one story. Please forgive me, any ladies listening. I once met a girl and I said, "Let's go out."
Is it YouTube friendly? This one?
It's YouTube friendly. And I said, "I'll take you to the pictures," and it was. The special edition of Close Encounters showing at the ABC in Leeds. She says, great, I work in Leeds. I said, well, I'll meet you there. So I knocked off work at 4:30, you know, washed chains, on the 7 o'clock bus into Leeds, meets her up. Now, the film had already been on a few weeks. So we goes in, and there's hardly anybody in the theatre, you know, and we sat there watching it. And after about 20 minutes, I looked round and she'd fallen asleep. So I thought, I got up ever so quietly and put my chair up, sneaked out of the cinema and left, and got on the bus and went home. And I've often wondered how long she was asleep there, and what did she think? How long did she sit
when she
there?
woke up and you'd gone? Yeah.
How long did she sit there? But it wasn't all bad, because my mate who we were out with the same night took her friend out, and they ended up getting married and have been married ever since. So there you go.
Oh, superb. Right. There we go. It's not all UFOs, people.
This is not a question, but I found it very interesting, actually, from Marky Mark again. The infliction of pain is clearly malicious. Abductions, of course. All these entities have to. All the entities have to do is pick up a book. The information is already there for them. A medical book.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've only got to look at mankind. I mean, we still experiment on all kinds of creatures, I believe. And we certainly catch them. And, you know, they always, and again, if we look at fishing, I've never fished in my life, but they say, oh, the fish don't feel the hook. How do we know that?
Absolutely.
You know,
it's true. It's probably we're just sort of convincing ourselves that they don't feel the hook.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know, but it's correct. But if there were aliens, you know, and they may look down on us. You know, we could be the ants. We look down on the ants and think, no, squashing a few underfoot.
No, we could be a crop.
So why would I therefore have to read a book about inflicting pain on this thing? It's a nothing as far as we're concerned.
Absolutely. And they're not even forced to think in any way like we do anyway.
Exactly. They may not experience pain. They may have no idea what pain is.
Yeah.
Okay, I might have a couple of questions later on.
Yeah. Are you okay with questions for a minute, Philip? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I'm collecting more for a little bit later, guys, so I'll be back on a little bit later. Okay.
But one of the things we talk about, you know, investigating, and one of the criticisms at the time of the Pascagoula case was that the bridge you went over was a toll bridge.
Right.
And it was manned 24/7.
Excuse me.
So the question was, well, why didn't there's a guy sat in the toll booth, why the hell didn't he see anything? And again, I found an interview with him, but not man to man. It was an exchange of letters. Now, in the newspaper, this guy was featured, and this is in the new book. It was featured in the newspaper saying, yeah, I'd have seen it, you know, bunch of lying hicks and hillbillies or whatever. But when this UFO researcher contacted him, he wasn't as forthright as that. He said, I was actually doing something roughly about that time. Yeah. You know, he said, we didn't keep our eyes open on everything. We didn't have to because we didn't get much traffic.
Yeah, it's not imperative that everybody has to see it just because it's happened, Philip.
Exactly. So, you know, what I've said is, look, you know, crimes happen, murders take place, things happen, and nobody sees it.
So I don't mean let's jump away from Pascagoula because I want to ask you, no, let's stay with it just for a moment. I want to ask you about the three fishermen who encountered the object underwater, because Linny were going to ask it and I hadn't seen Linny in chat.
Well, it wasn't three, Paul, there was 8.
8. Oh, apologies.
Yeah.
Right.
So what happened was it was November the 9th, I believe, in the same stretch of river, but a bit further out. So it's a little bit deeper. There were 3 skiffs. That's where you might have got 3 from. There were 3 little fishing boats out at night with their nets. And they saw this thing under the water. And it was circular. It was illuminated. And they said it was in segments, a bit like the Second World War parachutes, you know. And a chap by the name of Mr. Ryan and his son got so close to it, they could hit it with an oar, and it went clunk. And then the lights would go out and it would appear somewhere else, and it was cat and mouse. So they went in person to the Coast Guard station and reported it. And the Coast Guard sent a vessel out, and they too saw it, and they too hit it with an instrument, and it went clunk.
So it's not bioluminescence; it's a solid object.
Not at all. It went clunk. And what we did get is a complete copy of the Coast Guard's investigation, including all the names of the people involved, press releases, the lot. And they say in it, it's unidentified. So again, this is how you work with people. This a fellow UFO researcher in the States, I'll not mention his name, but he said, do you know so-and-so's got a photograph of all those fishermen? No, I didn't know that. So I went and asked him. Of course they have, Philip. Yeah, no problem. What happened the next day, the Navy came out and they were asking what happened. And the Coast Guard lined up all the witnesses on the quayside and took a photograph in colour. And then they turned it over and wrote everybody's name on it and how old they were. So you knew who everybody was on the picture.
Brilliant.
And I put this photograph again on social media. I said, anybody know any of these people? Here's all the names. And within a couple of hours, Paul, a lady had contacted me and she says they're all dead apart from one. because that one is I think she's his father-in-law.
Right.
And he was the youngest one there. He was called Earl Ryan, age 16 at the time. So again, got his phone number from her. Within a couple of days, Irina had interviewed him. And he said, yeah, it's exactly as in those documents. And he said, we hit it and it went clunk because he was on his father's boat. And he said that the Navy came out the next day and they said, this is the way they think. He said, the Navy said, show us where it happened. He said, it's just there in the water. There's nothing to see. You know, it was just there. Now, some people say you shouldn't connect this with the Pascagoula case because it happened, you know, 3 weeks later.
I would connect it with it. To be honest with you, I'd connect all this unexplained phenomena. You know, I'm better than anybody, but usually when there's something seen, you've got events before, you've got events after, and I think so. Yeah.
We had another chap. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's actually in the documentary we've just done on Blaze, and he was working on one of the ships in the shipyard, and he said, "Philip, when you're off the ground and then you're on top of the ship, you're a long way up." And he said, we had a great view of the, you know, surrounding area. They saw a formation of circular objects under the water go into the Mississippi Sound. And then X amount of time later, he assumes it's the same ones come out. But he said, what the strange thing was, they didn't disturb the water in any way.
It's crazy, isn't it? Absolutely.
So we had another witness to something under the water, totally separate from the fisherman.
My dad's brother, who's still alive, Andrew, he was a second officer in Navy, and he remembers. He told me this story. Not really into UFOs or anything, Andrew. Like, you know, we talk often to him, but on his story he'd got to share with me. He'd been all over the world. He says, and they were in South China Sea. He says, and everybody come up on deck. He said because there were huge luminous spheres on like just below the surface of the sea. Could have been bioluminescence, but you know, he said we were all looking at these things. But there were a reason why I mentioned this tapping on the hull of something by the boat, because I don't suppose anybody will be listening from Bridlington, but they may be fishermen or anything. If you know the fishing boat vessel that came out of Bridlington that came alongside the luminous object of Flamborough and Bempton, please point me in the right direction, get in touch, because I want to know about it. And one more thing, my phone went last week during the live stream, didn't answer it, but it was a private number. You'd left a message, which I listened to, telling me you were going to give me some information, and unfortunately, you asked me to ring you back, but it's a private number. So if you're listening to it this tonight, leave me a number so I'll ring you. Yeah, that's all I can say. Otherwise, I'd have forgot. Back to you, Philip.
Yeah, but local fishermen in Pascagoula, they knew about luminescence. You know, that some of the shrimp used to be bioluminescent, but they hit it and it went bonk.
That's
and then
right.
All the lights went out, and then it would appear elsewhere. And they were literally playing cat and mouse with it.
It's fascinating. Are you okay, Philip? Do you need a drink or anything?
No, I'm okay. Yeah.
So Philip Mantle, 2025, what's next?
Well, as you know, Paul, I've not been well for best part of a year almost now, and this is I think this is the second interview I've done in a long time. It's the only live one I've done.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it.
And so I'm getting back on my feet is the main priority. I still have medical appointments to attend. I was actually at one today, but things are moving in the right direction. So slowly but surely. My colleague, Dr. Irina Scott, is writing a book again about Pascagoula, not necessarily about sightings and more witnesses. She's comparing it with other events, and she wants to impress the importance of this case.
Absolutely.
Because of it, and she'll go through A, B, C, and D. What we have to understand about Dr. Scott is she was involved, if you like. She lives in Ohio, but she was away from home in October 1973. I think it was Missouri. She was studying for a PhD, and her mum rang her, and she said, "Have you heard that big bang?" So, "What are you talking about, mother?" She said, "It's been this huge big bang." So her mother rang her again the following night and said, "There's been UFO sightings. People are going nuts." She says, get out of it, you crackers. So X amount of years later, you know, Irina's working at a university now, got a PhD, and this bang came back to her. So she went into the library, went through the newspapers from that time period. She only could remember it was early to mid-October, and she found it. So on October the 11th, 1973, halfway across America was a huge, I call it a sonic boom.
Yeah, yeah.
Irina doesn't. She says it wasn't a sonic boom. You can't call it that. It was this big bang, and she cannot find a rational explanation for it. That happened on the same day.
All adds to this.
And she's worked with universities about it, Paul, and got this info downloaded and checked with this and checked with that. And she's of the opinion that it is the second loudest noise ever recorded.
Really?
Yeah, because it was recorded at the time. You've got the graph of it. And it's just another puzzling thing. Another thing about Pascagoula, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Is I got contact with a gentleman, and he said, I've got the very first, he was a journalist, the very first interview with Charlie and Calvin. And he said, I've got it on film. I said, when did you film it? He says, the day after. Somebody beat you to it, mate, but not on film. Now, this journalist, he worked with the sheriff's department. He had a bit of a mole inside who would tip him off sometimes. And he got tipped off about this UFO sighting. So the next morning, he goes to the sheriff's office. Of course, they're not there. They're at the hospital. So he goes to the hospital. By the time he gets there, they're not there either. They've now gone to the Air Force Base at Keesler.
Right.
So he went to Keesler Air Force Base with his camera and waited outside. And he has the first filmed interview with Charlie and Calvin, but they would only speak to him with their backs to the camera. Right. So you have the two guys like this with their backs to the camera. You have this fella with his face, and I have the full film.
Right. Okay.
But the interesting thing is, he also filmed some other interviews on this same reel of film. And one is a local guy, worked for the local civil defence, and he ran the Weather Bureau. And he interviews him, and of course he got something on radar. And we have this full interview that nobody's ever seen.
So has that been put out anywhere yet?
No. The transcript of it is in the new book. And the third and final interview on this reel of film, I have all the film as well, of course, is a hoax. There was a local taxi driver. He said he'd seen this flying saucer land and these creatures came out. And of course, he forgot that his mate was parked behind him. So this journalist interviewed his mate. And I said, there was nothing there, I can assure you. And he later admitted it was a hoax. So they have all gone in the new book.
Excellent. Brilliant. So obviously, we're probably going to jump back to Pascagoula at last few questions. But what about in the UK? And I don't mean in the past. Have you got any interesting little tidbits that have been sent through to you? Or has your illness just sort of overtaken last few months?
This last 12 months, I've virtually done next to nothing. Most of the books that I've published by other people, I had to take off sale because I couldn't deal with them. I was too ill, and it wasn't fair to the various authors. But what I have been doing, I started it before I was ill, and it will probably be my last book, and it'll come out sometime next year. And it's the various things that I've been involved with down the years. So everything in this book, I've been involved in somehow. Sometimes in only a small way, sometimes in a big way. For example, there's a couple of hoaxes in there. There is the alien autopsy. We're all aware of that.
Yeah.
But there was actually an alien abduction hoax in Roundy Park in Leeds.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not far from us both. So
that's in there. I was involved in that. Then there was a set of hoax UFO photographs from Barnsley in South Yorkshire. And I was heavily involved in that. So that's in there. So lots of other stuff as well. It's not all hoaxes. So everything in that book will be the different things I've been involved with down the years. It's not everything, but it's most of things that I've been involved in.
So Pascagoula aside then, Philip,
yeah.
if you were to pick a case that you've been involved in that stood out to you, what would it be?
There's always one that springs to mind, Paul, and it's not fantastic and it's not got additional witnesses, but I live in Pontefract in West Yorkshire. I was born just a few miles from here, just outside of Wakefield. Just down the road from here is a little town called Normanton. In the early 1980s, I just getting started in this game, and I did a little feature for the Wakefield Express. And they make you stand there on the cover with your camera, you know, looking at tit, you know. But anyway, this lady rang me and she said, "You'll never believe me, you never believe me." I said, "Well, give us a chance." And she talked about this UFO she'd seen landing in Normanton. So myself and Mark Birdsall from the Yorkshire UFO Society made an appointment to go and see her. And she was, this whole area at the time was all mining. It's all gone now. But, you know, my dad was a coal miner all his life. She was a collier's wife. She lived in a small house. She was exactly like the people I'd grown up with. And she said the children were outside and lived in a little cul-de-sac, Paul. And beyond the cul-de-sac is some fields and some electricity pylons, because they used to go to Ferrybridge Power Station. That's closed now.
Yeah.
And she said they were out playing a ball game. And it's a ball game I used to play. It's one we make up. You just put 3 clothes pegs up against the curb and you knock them down with a tennis ball and you've got to put them back together. And I thought, I used to play that when I was a kid. The ball goes up in the air and the kid said, "We saw this thing come down and land in the fields." And then went running in. Mum, they said, "There's an airplane landed in the fields." She was actually washing the dishes after lunch. She came out, she said, "We can see across these fields." And she said, "It's no airplane, Philip. It's shaped like a Mexican hat, but it's silver in colour and it's on the ground." So she got the kids over this field. There used to be a little bit of a fence. It's not there now. They got to the fence and the kids, she says, now there's these 3 men all in white boiler suits with a visor over their head, waving something across the ground. She held the kids back. These 3 men got in this thing. It rose up, stopped, and then shot off. Hence it came. And she thought, right, you know, I'll sit down and watch the local news tonight. It's bound to be on. The M62 motorway runs right past Normanton. You know, I'm only a mile from the motorway here. Nothing on. She said, right, I get the local newspaper. Nothing. She even asked some of her neighbours. She thought, I'm nuts. We interviewed the kids. They never called them spacemen or alien. And they did some drawings. Mark Birdsall was quite a talented artist in his own right. And he's listening to them talking and he's drawing at the same time. Did it look like that? Oh, and it was very close.
Yeah.
So years later, let me just have a drink.
Yeah. Take your time, Philip.
I tried a couple of times to relocate these children that are grown up now, of course. And I published this case in the local paper here. Nothing. Zilch, zero. Must have been, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. I did a talk on some podcast, and I mentioned this case, but I forgot to give out the family's name. And the family was called Westerman. So a lady from New Zealand emailed me and she said, well, I used to live in Normanton. What was the family's name? And I said, Westerman. She says, is it so-and-so? She was my best friend. And right. she had this lady's email. Right. And she gave it to me. So I emailed her and she was one of these children. She's now grown up, got her own family. She said, yeah. She confirmed everything. Then about a year later, again, I think I'd done something on TV. I don't know what it was. A fella contacted me. And he says, my partner was witness to a sighting at Normanton.
So there's another one.
And it was another one. She was one of the children's friends who was there playing with them at the time. And I spoke to her and I said, I'll come and interview you. They'd now moved to Cornwall, so that was out of the question. But she confirmed everything that, you know, we found out all those years back. But here's the thing, yeah, where you have to be careful.
I know what you're going to say.
She says two men in black, two scientists came to interview us all. Those two scientists were me and Mark Birdsall, and we certainly weren't scientists, you know what I mean? I never claimed to be. So it shows you how something quite innocuous.
Get distorted. Yeah.
If she told that story to someone else, they'd be looking for these two mysterious scientists. We were smartly dressed when we went, but we never said we were scientists.
So the ladies are telling the truth about what they saw, what they experienced, and Mum saw, but over time, you've become scientists, you know, in their minds.
And the location, Paul, is just an ordinary street. I've been there. I went last year and took some photographs. It's not to take photographs of. It's just a house and a field and some electricity pylons.
It's very similar, and I haven't got time to go into it, but Leslie Buttle, lovely lady, lives in Bridlington. And myself and Chris Turner have interviewed her, and the other two ladies have passed away. A lady called Margaret Mooney and Liz Jenkinson, I think it was, and they were cleaners at the Britax factory. It was PLG, Britax. Anyway, they were cleaners. They were coming about 4:45 at night. See this cloud in a clear sky that's just getting dark, unusual, low over the allotment side at factory. I'll really go through this quick because I think Les might want to get a question in. And the cloud clears and there's an egg-shaped object that's just there. They suffer all kinds of prickly sensations on the skin. The watches have stopped. Analog watches, they've stopped. There's a lot more to it. If anybody wants to hear this story Sunday or next week, we'll do it because I want Philip to finish this one. Basically, though, because I spoke to Leslie quite a lot about this, they said that men in suits came, you know, not I won't say the few days after, but the following week, and they were talked to and they went to the council. And I think that were UFO investigators because it was covered at the time by UFO investigators. And I think that we've got a similar thing happening there.
Absolutely. You know?
You might even remember that one. It were on Bessingby Industrial Estate at Bridlington in 1977, January. Yeah. But let's go to Les, I think, and just finish this off with a few questions, Philip, because we've really hammered Pascagoula tonight, and we appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, guys. Been a great show. Really fantastic job. You're back on there, Philip. Stephen Collin. Well, Stephen, I'm afraid Paul has took your thunder and already asked the question. So the question was, Philip, in your opinion, what's the best encounter in British UFO lore?
Well, I'm not saying it's the best. It's the one that sticks in my mind because in those days, everybody knew about Roswell and, you know, Rendlesham, but this was in our own backyard. This was 5 or 6 miles from where I was born. You know, I only live a few miles from the place. If I go to Wakefield from here, I go past the place every time, you know. And I like to emphasize that these events do take place in these areas. They're not always out in the New Mexico desert, you know. They happen here, there, and everywhere.
Yep, great point that, Philip, as well.
Okay, Scott Smith is asking, do you think it odd that advanced beings need to revert to such a primitive way of examining, such as putting digits into body cavities, causes me to doubt?
Yeah, good question. A good question, but we can only think like humans because that's what we are. And if there are species elsewhere in the universe that have come here, and I'm not saying that, you know, these are aliens, but why would they think like us?
Absolutely.
You know, completely different.
Okay, and
I wonder what my dog thinks when he goes to vets and they stick a thermometer up his backside. You know, and sorry to reduce it to that kind of level.
No,
you're right. I mean, think of it this way: the next most intelligent species on this earth is the dolphins. But yeah, we can't communicate with them. We can't ask Flipper how he's feeling today. I mean, how's the wife? He's been nagging you again. We can teach him to jump up in the air and, you know, do a few flips and eat a few fish. You know, so why would we think that something that's more advanced than us would be able to communicate with us? Who knows?
Yep. But good question anyway.
Yeah, great question. And I don't know how much time you want to spend on answering this one, Phil, Moondog. What's Phil's opinion about crash retrievals? If some are real, then they have evidence, like David Grush's testified.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're being pragmatic about it, you need something on the table that you can examine. If you look at Roswell, because it's the granddaddy of all crash retrievals and can't not mention it, go right back to the first bits of info about it. It was junk. It was bits of wood that looked like balsa, bits of tin foil. And then no investigation was done in the next 40 years. It's only the late 70s, I think it was 1978, when they found Marcel Senior.
And it picked it up.
Yeah, but it wasn't until probably the early 90s that any real investigation was done. And then it turned into a cosmic Watergate. And you have to ask yourself, how do you go from some junk to a cosmic Watergate? What the hell has happened in between? You know, and it's supposedly the granddaddy of all crash retrievals, but yet there's nothing you can find, nothing that I could say to you, here you go, stick that under your microscope and the answer's there.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Going back to Pascagoula, Stephen Collins saying, that's amazing to think he actually got hold of this entity. That must have been something to see that.
Well, again, if you get to know Calvin and think of his character, Calvin was a tough guy, hardworking, honest, southern guy, you know. Like he said, my brother was the brains, I was the brawn. If you anybody picked up...
What are you bounty hunter? What are you bounty hunter at one point?
Well, we're going to come to that. He split up from his wife for a while. One of the jobs he took on, he was a bounty hunter. And he went out and got people. And he was a debt collector as well. He told me one story. He said, I went to get this guy, and he said, oh, no problem with him. Just took my baseball bat with me. And he said he took the baseball bat off me and hit me with it. So he said, I always took my shotgun after that. He says, because they never argued with that. You know what I mean? So it was Calvin. If you get to know Calvin, it was his character. And that's why he was deeply embarrassed as well that he'd not been able to fight these things off. Wasn't able to defend himself. I mean, he was, another story, he was heavily traumatized by what happened. It plagued him for his whole life. And his wife told me this story. She sent him out for a loaf of bread once. He turned up 3 days later in New Mexico, you know, and in between times, he'd been beat up, he'd been mugged, he'd fought half a dozen cowboys in a bar, you know, and he just said he just needed to get away from it. But he was a tough guy, so it was Calvin's natural reaction would be to fight if he could.
Okay, thank you.
Conscious of the time now, guys, and probably the last question comes from Dragonborn, and the question is, Philip, can you tell us what do you think is the end game for all of this, please?
Oh, that's a great question. I honestly have no idea. Not a clue. I mean, again, I'll go back to what Calvin's thoughts were. He wrote me a large piece that I kept for years. And he said, don't publish this until I die. I think he did this at the point he first took ill. And he already knew that it wasn't going to be a good outcome, you know, even though it took a few years for him to die. I think he knew. And he thinks, you know, that he believes in aliens, that we are being visited by aliens, and at some point they're going to help us. And that help will be universal. It will be to all of mankind and will help solve our problems with war and famine and, you know, etc., etc. That is the end game as he saw it. But we're all different and we all think different. We all have access to different information. So my idea of the end game would probably be very different to anyone's else. You know, I think the end game might well be that there could well be no such thing as UFOs, as we call it today now. If you look back, mankind has always interacted with something out of the ordinary. They were called them ghosts, spirits,
angels.
gods, angels, Nephilim, you name it. I've often wondered if in, say, a couple of 100 years' time, our books, my books, Paul's books, would still be available somewhere in some sort of library, but might be registered under the folklore section.
You know, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll give you an example. When Whitley Strieber wrote his book Communion, where I lived, we had no bookshop. I had to get the bus into Leeds. We had one big bookseller in Leeds. And I trekked up through Leeds into this big bookshop. And you know where I found it? Under the religious section.
Really?
Absolutely. That's where I got my copy of Communion from. So I've often wondered, looking back, if we could, obviously we can't, but where our books might be listed.
Where they end up in the future, yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect ending, Philip. Absolutely. And thank you for giving us 2 hours of your time. Really
No, my pleasure. I'm sorry. I think we were supposed to speak to Brian Allan tonight, were we not? Brian's been in hospital. He just got out today. I'm pleased to hear.
Well, I'm glad that Brian's on the mend, and no doubt we'll catch up with Brian in next week, a month or so, definitely.
One thing, if Brian tells you I owe him a pint, it's not true.
Well, he's a Scotchman, isn't he? So we might do.
Yes, so thanks for everybody for coming on to tonight's stream. Great to see you all. Thanks for Lee for doing moderating, and Alison. I know I think Lee's disappeared now, but thanks, Lee, for trying to get on. And thanks, Philip, for coming on as a guest.
My pleasure, gentlemen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. Good night.
Good night.